My wife went on a girls' trip with her rich friends, and came back pregnant by her best friend's husband, but her face froze when you know that feeling when your wife bounces into the room with that particular sparkle in her eyes? The one that usually means she's about to spend money we don't have on something we don't need? Yeah. Well, that Tuesday evening in March, Marissa practically floated through our front door like she just won the lottery. I was sprawled on the couch, remote in hand, trying to decide between watching grown men chase a ball around or some reality show where people pretend to find love in 30 days. Real tough choice there, honey, she squealed, and I swear the windows rattled. You're never going to believe what just happened. I muted the TV and braced myself. Last time she'd said those exact words, we'd ended up with a timeshare in Florida that we visited exactly once. The time before that, she'd signed us up for ballroom dancing lessons that made me look like a seizure victim having a particularly bad episode. Clara just called. She continued, practically vibrating with excitement as she kicked off those ridiculously expensive heels that cost more than my car payment. She's invited me on the most amazing girls' trip ever. Clara, of course, it was Clara. Clara Martinez Blackwell, or whatever hyphenated name she was using these days, was Marissa's best friend from college and the kind of woman who probably had her morning coffee served on actual gold plates. The woman lived in a different stratosphere than us regular folks. The kind where money wasn't a problem. It was just a tool you used to solve minor inconveniences. Let me guess, I said, already knowing this was going to hurt my wallet somehow. She wants you to fly to Paris for lunch and shop for shoes that cost more than our mortgage. Marissa rolled her eyes in that way. That meant I was being dramatic again. No, smartass. She's rented this incredible beach resort for a whole week. Just the girls, no husbands, no kids, no responsibilities. Pure relaxation. She plopped down next to me on the couch, her face glowing like she discovered fire. It's going to be champagne every morning, spa treatments every afternoon, and just us girls catching up on everything. When's the last time I got to do something like this? I had to admit, she had a point. Between my job at the insurance company and her work at the nonprofit, we barely had time to catch our breath, let alone take vacations to fancy beach resorts. Our idea of a romantic getaway was usually dinner at Olive Garden, followed by a movie we'd stream at home because we were too cheap to pay theater prices. How much is this going to cost us? I asked because, let's be real, when your wife's rich friends invite her somewhere, there's always a catch. And that catch usually involves your credit card crying itself to sleep. That's the best part, she said, grabbing my hands like she was about to deliver news that would change our lives forever. Claire is covering everything. The resort, the food, the drinks, even the spa treatments. She said she just booked the whole place and wants her closest friends there to celebrate. Celebrate what? Marissa shrugged. I don't know. Life being awesome. Does it matter? I had to laugh. Only Clara would spend what was probably my annual salary on a week-long party just because she felt like it. Her husband, Victor, made some kind of ridiculous money in tech or finance or whatever it is that rich guys do when they wear suits that cost more than my car. I'd met him a few times at dinner parties and charity events that Marissa dragged me to. And he seemed decent enough. The kind of guy who remembered your name and actually listened when you talked, which was more than I could say for most of the stuffed shirts in their circle. So, when is this magical mystery tour happening? I asked. Next week, she said, and I could practically see her mentally packing already. Clara said it was last minute because someone else canceled and she didn't want the reservation to go to waste. Of course, it was next week. Rich people operated on a different timeline than the rest of us. They could just drop everything and jet off to paradise whenever the mood struck. Meanwhile, I'd have to sweet-talk my boss into letting me take a sick day if I wanted to sleep in on a Tuesday. The next few days were a whirlwind of shopping and preparation that would have made a military operation look casual. Marissa bought new dresses, new swimsuits, new everything. She got her hair done, her nails done, and probably a few other things done that I didn't want to think about too hard. By the time she was ready to leave, our bedroom looked like a boutique had exploded in it. Are you sure you have enough stuff? I asked, watching her try to cram what looked like half of Nordstrom into 2 suitcases. Very funny, she said, but she was smiling. She looked happier than I'd seen her in months. And honestly, that made the credit card damage almost worth it. Almost. The morning she left, she was practically bouncing off the walls with excitement. She'd been up since 5 o'clock, double-checking everything and making sure she hadn't forgotten anything important. I made her coffee and toast, which she barely touched because she was too excited to eat. You're going to have an amazing time, I told her, and I meant it. She deserved this. We both worked hard, and if her rich friend wanted to spoil her for a week, who was I to complain? She threw her arms around me and kissed me like we were in some romantic movie. "I'm going to miss you so much," she said. "But I promise I'll call every night and tell you all about it. Just promise me you won't come back with any crazy ideas about redecorating the house with seashells or something," I said. She laughed and kissed me again. No promises. The Uber arrived right on schedule because, of course, Clara had arranged for premium transportation to the airport. I helped load her bags, which took longer than it should have because she'd packed like she was planning to relocate permanently to this beach resort. "Have fun," I told her as she climbed into the car. "Don't do anything I wouldn't do." "That doesn't leave me with many options," she shot back with a grin. I watched the car disappear down our street, taking my wife off to paradise with her rich friends. The house felt empty without her energy filling it up, but I was genuinely happy for her. She deserved a week of being pampered and treated like royalty, even if it was at some resort I couldn't even pronounce the name of. I had no idea that I was watching my marriage drive away in that Uber. Had no clue that the woman who'd kissed me goodbye with such excitement would come back carrying secrets that would destroy everything we'd built together. All I knew was that my wife was going to have the time of her life, and I was going to spend the week eating cereal for dinner and watching sports without anyone judging my life choices. If I'd known what was really going to happen on that once-in-a-lifetime girls' trip, I would have chained her to the couch. But hindsight's 20/20, and at the time, all I could see was my wife's happiness as she headed off to what I thought would be a harmless week of girl talk and overpriced cocktails. Boy, was I wrong. So, there I was, living the bachelor life for a whole 12 hours. And let me tell you, it was everything I'd forgotten it could be. I ate pizza straight from the box while standing in my underwear at the kitchen counter, left my socks wherever they landed, and watched 3 consecutive hours of a show about guys building motorcycles. Pure bliss, right? Wrong. Because around 9 o'clock that first night, I started missing her laugh echoing through the house. That's when my phone buzzed with a FaceTime call. And there she was, my gorgeous wife, looking like she'd stepped out of some tropical magazine spread. The screen was filled with her sun-kissed face. And behind her, I could see what looked like paradise. Crystal blue water stretched out to the horizon. Palm trees swayed in the breeze. And the whole scene was bathed in that golden hour lighting that photographers would probably kill for. "Oh my God, honey. You should see this place," she gushed, holding the phone at arm's length so I could get the full panoramic view. "It's absolutely incredible." And it really was. The resort looked like something out of a billionaire's fever dream. All white marble and infinity pools with staff members who probably made more in tips than I made in overtime. Clara really hadn't been kidding when she'd said she was going all out for this trip. "Looks like you're suffering real hard out there," I said, settling back into my recliner with a beer. "I can see how this is just terrible for you." She giggled and I could hear other women's voices in the background. Her fellow escapees from reality. No doubt sharing war stories about their various first world problems over drinks that cost more than my lunch budget for a week. "We just finished the most amazing dinner," she continued, turning the camera to show me the remnants of what looked like a feast fit for royalty. "And now we're about to hit the beach bar. Clara says they make these signature cocktails that are supposed to be life-changing." "Life-changing cocktails, huh?" "Let me guess. They cost about $50 each and come with a little umbrella that's probably worth more than my tie." "You're so cynical," she laughed, but she didn't deny it. "Just because you can't appreciate the finer things in life doesn't mean the rest of us can't enjoy them." She had me there while she was sipping champagne that probably aged longer than our marriage. I was working my way through a 6-pack of beer I'd bought with a coupon. Different worlds for sure. The next night, she called again, right on schedule. This time she looked even more radiant, if that was possible. Her skin had that perfect golden glow that only comes from a day spent lounging by the pool without a care in the world. And her hair had those beachy waves that women pay hair stylists hundreds of dollars to recreate. "How was your day in paradise?" I asked, genuinely curious about what rich people did when they had unlimited time and money to burn. "Oh, she said, waving a hand dismissively. "Just girl stuff. We got massages, laid by the pool, had lunch at this cute little place overlooking the water." "Sounds rough," I said. Meanwhile, I had to deal with Mrs. Patterson calling about her flood claim for the 3rd time this week. Apparently, her definition of water damage includes everything that's ever been in the same room as a glass of water. She laughed, but it seemed a little forced. "Poor baby. Are you surviving without me?" "Barely," I said. "I actually had to do my own laundry yesterday. Nearly called emergency services." As we talked, I noticed other women moving around in the background. Clara and her crew all looking like they belonged in a luxury resort commercial. They were the kind of women who never had bad hair days or worried about whether their jeans made their butts look big because they could afford personal trainers and stylists to handle those problems for them. What else did you guys do today? I asked because honestly I was curious about how the other half lived. Oh, just, typical vacation stuff, she said. But her answer felt weirdly vague. Usually Marissa would give me a play-by-play of her day, complete with detailed descriptions of every meal and commentary on everyone's outfits. This time, it was like she was reading from a script written by someone who'd never been on vacation before. Come on, I pressed, give me details. What's Clara like when she's not hosting charity dinners? Are the other women as pretentious as they seem at those fancy parties you drag me to? They're actually really sweet, she said, but she seemed distracted by something happening off-screen. Look, honey, I should probably go. The girls are waiting for me and we're about to head out for the evening. Hot date with I joked. Something like that, she said. And for just a split second, I thought I saw someone move behind her. A male figure that definitely wasn't one of the girls. But it happened so fast that I convinced myself I'd imagined it. Maybe it was just a waiter or one of those resort staff members who were probably trained to be invisible until you needed them. The third night, the pattern continued. Beautiful scenery, glowing wife, vague answers about her day. But this time, I was sure I saw him. A guy in the background. Just a glimpse, but enough to make me pause. Hey, was that Victor the first just saw? I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. Victor. She looked confused for a split second, then recovered. Oh, yeah. He stopped by earlier to check on things. You know how Clara is. She likes to make sure everything's perfect. That made sense, I guess. Rich guy's rich wife throws expensive party. Rich guy makes sure rich wife has everything she needs. It was probably standard operating procedure in their tax bracket. Still, something about the way she'd hesitated before answering nagged at me. Is he staying at the resort, too? I asked. God, no. She laughed. And this time, it sounded more natural. Can you imagine? This is supposed to be girls' time. He's probably back home playing golf and doing whatever it is that guys like Victor do when their wives are away. That made me feel better. Though, I couldn't quite put my finger on why I'd been bothered in the first place. Maybe it was just the weird adjustment of being apart for longer than we'd ever been since we got married. Or maybe it was the fact that her world and mine felt more different than ever when she was surrounded by all that luxury. I miss you, I told her. And I meant it. I miss you, too, she said. But she was already looking away, distracted by something or someone calling her name. Look, I really do have to go. The girls are getting impatient and you know how Clara gets when people keep her waiting. Actually, I didn't know how Clara got about anything because we moved in completely different social circles. But I nodded anyway. Go have fun, I said. Just remember what happens in paradise better stay in paradise or I'm trading you in for a younger model. She laughed, but something about it didn't quite reach her eyes. Very funny. Love you. Love you, too. The screen went black, leaving me alone with my beer and the nagging feeling that something wasn't quite right. But what did I know about girls' trips to expensive resorts? Maybe this was just how rich people vacationed, all mysterious and glamorous with vague stories and expensive cocktails. I shook off the weird feeling and went back to my motorcycle show. After all, what could possibly go wrong on a simple girls' trip? Famous last words right there. You know how when you've been looking forward to something for so long that when it finally happens, it almost feels anticlimactic. That's exactly how I felt sitting in the arrivals area at the airport, holding one of those cheesy welcome home signs I'd made as a joke. I'd even drawn little stick figures of us on it with hearts floating around our heads because I'm nothing if not a romantic genius. I'd been counting down the days like some lovesick teenager planning this whole elaborate homecoming. I'd cleaned the house until it sparkled, bought her favorite flowers, and even attempted to cook something that didn't come from a box or require a microwave. The lasagna was probably going to give us both food poisoning. But hey, it's the thought that counts, right? When I finally spotted her coming down the escalator, my heart did that stupid flutter thing that still happened even after all these years of marriage. She looked incredible, tanned, relaxed, wearing this flowy white dress that made her look like some kind of beach goddess. Her hair was lighter from the sun, and she had that effortless vacation glow that made me remember why I'd fallen for her in the first place. There's my world traveler, I called out, holding up the ridiculous sign, and probably embarrassing her in front of all the other sophisticated travelers who definitely didn't make arts and crafts projects for airport pickups. But instead of the huge smile and running leap hug I was expecting, she just walked over like she was reporting for duty or something. She kissed my cheek, not my lips, and said, "Hi, honey." In the same tone someone might use to acknowledge the mailman. That's it? I asked, genuinely confused. I don't get the full rom-com airport reunion scene. I made a sign and everything. She glanced at the sign and managed what I can only describe as a polite smile. The kind you give to your dentist when he tells you that you need to floss more. It's very nice, she said, but she was already looking around for the exit. The drive home was weird, like really weird. Usually after any kind of trip, even just a weekend visiting her parents, Marissa would talk my ear off about everything that happened. She'd give me a minute-by-minute breakdown of who said what they ate, who wore the ugliest outfit, the whole 9 yards. I'd learned to just nod and make appropriate noises at the right moments because honestly, I loved hearing her get excited about stuff. But this time, radio silence. She just stared out the window like she was seeing our neighborhood for the first time. Or maybe like she was already missing wherever she'd just been. Her phone was in her lap and I swear she checked it about every 30 seconds, which was strange because Marissa usually complained about being too connected to technology. So I said, trying to break the ice. Was the resort as amazing as it looked in those pictures you sent? She said, still looking out the window. Very nice. Very nice. That was it. This from the woman who once gave me a 45-minute detailed review of a chain restaurant because they brought her the wrong salad dressing. And the girls? How was Clara? Did she live up to her reputation as the ultimate hostess? She was fine, Marissa said, shifting in her seat. They were all fine. I tried a different approach. Come on, give me something here. Did anyone have any drama? Surely someone's Botox went wrong or their fake eyelashes fell into the soup or something. These are your rich friends we're talking about. There had to be at least one meltdown over thread count or champagne temperature. She finally looked at me and for just a second I saw something flash across her face. Guilt. Panic. But it was gone so fast I almost thought I'd imagined it. Nothing like that happened. She said it was just relaxing, spa stuff and pool time. Not really exciting enough for a full recap. Not exciting enough. This was Marissa we were talking about, the woman who once spent an entire evening telling me about a conversation she'd overheard in the grocery store checkout line. Everything was exciting enough for a full recap when it came to my wife. When we got home, I carried her bags in while she kind of wandered around the house like she was taking inventory. I'd spend hours making sure everything was perfect. Flowers on the counter, candles lit in the bedroom. Even that fancy bottle of wine we'd been saving for a special occasion chilling in the fridge. Welcome home, beautiful, I said, gesturing around at my handiwork like some demented game show host. I know it's not as fancy as your 5-star resort, but it's got something that place didn't have. What's that? She asked, and I could swear she looked almost nervous about my answer. Me? I said, going for charming, but probably landing somewhere closer to cheesy. Your devastatingly handsome husband who missed you like crazy and may have burned dinner in your honor. That got a small smile out of her, the first real one since she'd gotten off that plane. You cooked? I attempted to cook. I corrected. Whether it's actually edible remains to be seen. But hey, if we die from food poisoning, at least we'll go together, right? Romantic, she said. But she was already heading toward the stairs. I think I'm going to take a shower first if that's okay. I feel like I've got airplane germs all over me. Sure, I said, trying not to feel deflated. Take your time. I'll keep dinner warm. She disappeared upstairs and I heard the bathroom door close, followed by the sound of the lock clicking, which was weird because Marissa never locked the bathroom door when it was just us. Hell, half the time she left it open while she was getting ready, chattering away about her day while she did her makeup. I stood there in our kitchen, surrounded by flowers and candles and the lingering smell of my culinary disaster, feeling more alone than I had during the entire week she'd been gone. Something was definitely off, but I couldn't put my finger on what it was. Maybe she was just tired from traveling, or maybe the adjustment from luxury resort life back to our regular existence was harder than expected. When she finally came downstairs, she was wearing her oldest, most comfortable pajamas and had pulled her hair back in a messy bun. She looked more like herself, but there was still something distant about her, like she was physically present, but mentally still somewhere else entirely. Dinner smells. She paused, probably searching for a diplomatic way to describe whatever horror I'd created in the kitchen. Interesting. That's one word for it, I said. I was going for edible, but I'll take interesting. We sat down to eat, and I kept waiting for her to open up to tell me about her week, to act like the woman I'd married instead of this polite stranger who happened to look exactly like my wife. But she just picked at her food and made small talk about the weather and asked about my work week like we were acquaintances catching up at a high school reunion. After dinner, she claimed she was exhausted and went to bed early. I found her curled up on her side of the bed, facing away from me, already pretending to be asleep, even though I could tell from her breathing that she wasn't. When I tried to put my arm around her, She tensed up and mumbled something about being tired. I lay there in the dark staring at the ceiling and trying to figure out what the hell had happened to my wife during her week in paradise, because the woman lying next to me might have looked like Marissa, might have sounded like Marissa, but she sure as hell wasn't acting like the woman I'd kissed goodbye at the airport a week ago. Something had changed during that trip. And whatever it was, it felt like it was sitting between us in bed like an invisible wall. I just had no idea how thick that wall was about to get. A month. A whole goddamn month of living with a stranger who happened to share my bed and my last name. 31 days of watching my wife go through the motions of being married to me while acting like I was some kind of roommate she barely tolerated. 31 days of increasingly awkward conversations, 4 smiles, and this weird tension that hung over our house like a fog that wouldn't lift. I tried everything I could think of to snap her out of whatever funk she was in. I brought home flowers, the expensive ones from the fancy florist, not the grocery store sad-looking bouquet. I suggested date nights, weekend getaways, even offered to take her to one of those pretentious restaurants she loved, where they served microscopic portions on plates the size of dinner tables. Nothing worked. She went through the motions, said all the right words, but it was like she was reading from a script written by someone who'd never actually been in love. The worst part was the phone thing. Jesus Christ, the phone thing was driving me insane. She'd always been attached to her phone. What woman wasn't these days? But this was different. This was obsessive. She carried it with her everywhere, clutched it like it contained the secrets of the universe, and God forbid I should happen to glance in its direction. She'd angle it away from me, turn the screen toward her body, and sometimes she'd even leave the room just to check her messages. Who keeps texting you? I'd asked one evening when her phone had buzzed for the 15th time during dinner. Just work stuff, she'd said, not even looking up from whatever was apparently more interesting than the conversation we weren't having. Since when does the nonprofit send urgent messages during dinner? Did someone discover a new way to save endangered butterflies that couldn't wait until morning? She'd given me one of those looks, the kind that said I was being unreasonable for expecting my wife to actually talk to me during meals. It's just busy right now, she'd said. And that was the end of that conversation. But this particular Tuesday morning, something was different. I could feel it the moment I walked into the kitchen. Marissa was sitting at our dining table, the one we bought at a garage sale and refinished together during our first year of marriage when we thought projects like that were romantic instead of just exhausting. She had her hands wrapped around a coffee mug like she was trying to absorb its warmth. And she was staring at the table like it held the answers to all of life's mysteries. "Morning, sunshine," I said, going for my usual cheerful husband routine, even though we both knew it was getting harder to pull off. "You're up early. Couldn't sleep." She looked up at me and I felt my stomach drop. Her face was pale. Her eyes were red-rimmed like she'd been crying. And she had this expression that I'd never seen before, like she was about to deliver news that would change everything. It was the kind of look people got right before they told you someone had died or the house was being foreclosed on. "We need to talk," she said, and her voice was barely above a whisper. For simple words that every husband in the history of marriage has learned to fear because "we need to talk" never preceded good news. Nobody ever said "we need to talk" and then announced they'd won the lottery or gotten a promotion or found a $20 bill in their old jeans. "We need to talk" was relationship code for "buckle up buttercup because your world is about to get rearranged." I sat down across from her trying to read her face for clues about what kind of disaster we were dealing with. My mind started racing through possibilities. Had she lost her job? Were her parents sick? Had someone died? Was she having some kind of midlife crisis where she decided she needed to find herself by backpacking through Europe or taking up pottery? "Okay," I said, trying to sound calm, even though my heart was already picking up speed. "What's going on?" She took a shaky breath and her hands trembled so badly around the coffee mug that I thought she might drop it. "I'm pregnant," she whispered. And for about 3 seconds, my world tilted in the best possible way. Pregnant. We'd been trying for a baby for months, having those careful conversations about timing and finances, and whether we were ready to bring a tiny human into our messy, imperfect life. We'd bought pregnancy tests in bulk from Costco, like we were preparing for some kind of conception apocalypse. We'd tracked ovulation cycles and optimal timing until the whole thing started feeling more like a science experiment than romance. "Are you serious?" I asked, and I could feel this stupid grin spreading across my face. "Really? We're finally going to be parents." But she didn't smile back. She didn't throw herself into my arms or start crying happy tears or do any of the things I'd imagined she'd do when this moment finally came. Instead, she just sat there looking like she was about to throw up, and not in a cute morning sickness kind of way. "Marissa," I said, and something cold started creeping up my spine. "What's wrong? Aren't you happy about this?" She opened her mouth, closed it, then opened it again like a fish gasping for air. When she finally spoke, her voice was so quiet I had to lean forward to hear her. "It's not yours." The words hit me like a physical blow. I actually felt my chest constrict, like someone had reached into my ribcage and squeezed my heart with their fist. The kitchen seemed to tilt sideways, and for a moment, I wondered if I was having some kind of medical emergency because surely this couldn't be real. Surely my wife hadn't just told me she was pregnant with another man's baby. "What did you just say?" I asked, because maybe I'd misheard. Maybe she'd said something else, something that didn't destroy everything I thought I knew about my life. She looked down at the table, tears streaming down her face. "Now the baby, it's not yours. Whose is it?" The question came out of my mouth before my brain had fully processed what was happening. I felt like I was watching this conversation from outside my body. Like this was happening to someone else and I was just a spectator to my own life falling apart. She was crying harder now. Ugly sobs that shook her whole body. "Victor's," she whispered. "Clara's husband." And there it was. The bomb that had been ticking away for a month finally exploded, taking our marriage, our future, our entire life together, and blowing it into tiny irreparable pieces. Victor, Clara's husband, Victor, who I'd shaken hands with at charity dinners and made small talk with about sports and the weather. Victor, who'd apparently done a lot more than just check on things during that girl's trip to paradise. I sat there staring at my wife, my pregnant wife, who was carrying another man's child, and tried to process information that my brain simply refused to accept. This had to be a mistake, a misunderstanding. Maybe she'd gotten confused about dates or timing or something. Anything other than what she was telling me. "How?" I asked because apparently my mouth was still working even though my brain had completely shut down. "The trip," she said, still not looking at me. "Clara had to leave for a few days. Family emergency. Victor came to help out with arrangements, make sure everything was still perfect. One night we all drank too much and she trailed off, but she didn't need to finish." I could fill in the blanks. I could picture it all too clearly. My wife drunk on expensive wine and the fantasy of a life she'd never have. Falling into bed with someone who represented everything I wasn't. Someone rich and sophisticated and successful. Someone who belonged in her world of luxury resorts and five-star everything. "It just happened," she said, like that explanation made any of this okay. "It was a mistake. A terrible, stupid mistake. And I hate myself for it." I wanted to scream. I wanted to flip the table and punch holes in the walls and demand to know how the hell you accidentally end up pregnant with your best friend's husband's baby. But instead, I just sat there numb and broken, watching my marriage dissolve into something I didn't recognize. "Does Clara know?" I asked. She shook her head. Fresh tears streaming down her face. "No, God, no. It would destroy her. It would destroy their marriage." "And what about ours?" I asked. "What about our marriage, Marissa?" She finally looked up at me, her face streaked with mascara and misery. "I don't know," she whispered. "I don't know how to fix this." The thing was, looking at her sitting there, destroyed by the weight of what she'd done. I almost felt sorry for her, almost because this was the woman I'd loved for years, the woman I'd planned to grow old with. And seeing her in pain still triggered every protective instinct I had. But then I remembered what she'd done, what she'd thrown away, what she'd chosen over me and our life together. And just like that, the sympathy evaporated, leaving behind something harder and colder than anything I'd ever felt before. You know that moment in movies where the main character gets life-changing news and the camera does this slow zoom while dramatic music swells in the background? Yeah. Well, real life doesn't come with a soundtrack. And there's no director yelling COD when things get too intense. There's just you sitting in your kitchen that still smells like the coffee you made before your world imploded, staring at your wife while she destroys everything you thought you knew about your life. "Tell me everything," I said, and my voice sounded weird and flat, like it was coming from someone else entirely. "I want to know exactly how this happened." Marissa looked up at me with those red, puffy eyes. And for a split second, I saw the woman I'd fallen in love with, vulnerable and scared, and desperately hoping I'd somehow make this all okay. But that feeling lasted about as long as a snowball in hell, because then I remembered that she'd been screwing her best friend's husband while I was home eating pizza and missing her like some kind of lovesick idiot. "I don't think you really want to hear the details," she said, wiping her nose with a tissue that looked like it had been through several rounds of crying already. "Oh, but I do," I said, leaning back in my chair and crossing my arms. "See, the thing is, for the past month, I've been driving myself crazy trying to figure out what was wrong with you. I thought maybe you were sick or depressed or having some kind of existential crisis about turning 35. I never once thought, hey, maybe my wife is pregnant with another dude's baby. So, yeah, I I really want to hear how we got from innocent girl's trip to surprise. You're going to be raising someone else's kid. She flinched like I'd slapped her, which honestly felt pretty good in that moment. You don't have to be cruel about it. Cruel? I laughed and it came out sounding harsh and bitter. Lady, I haven't even gotten started on cruel yet. You want to see cruel? Cruel is spending your anniversary weekend screwing around with your friend's husband while your actual husband is at home planning romantic dinners and buying expensive wine to celebrate your return. It wasn't our anniversary weekend, she said quietly. Oh, excuse me. My mistake. That makes it totally fine then. She took a shaky breath and started talking, and I swear every word was like a knife twisting in my chest. Clara got a call on the third day. Her mother had a heart attack and she had to fly back to Boston immediately. She was a mess, crying about ruining the trip for everyone, but we all told her to go. Obviously, family comes first. Obviously, I said, because apparently I was going to be sarcastic through this entire conversation. It was either that or start throwing things, and we couldn't afford to replace the dishes. Victor flew in that afternoon to handle the resort arrangements and make sure we had everything we needed. Clara insisted she didn't want our trip ruined just because she had to leave. How thoughtful of her and how convenient for you. Marissa's hands were shaking so badly now that she had to put her coffee mug down. He was just being nice, making sure we had dinner reservations, arranging spa appointments, that kind of thing. He was trying to honor what Clara had planned for us. Aha! And somewhere between arranging spa appointments and making dinner reservations, you two decided to honor something else entirely. It wasn't like that, she said, but her voice was getting smaller and smaller, like she was trying to disappear into herself. The first couple of days after Clara left, everything was normal. Victor was polite and helpful, but distant professional, like he was just doing a job. But then what? The professionalism just wore off. Did you guys bond over the mini-bar prices or what? She shot me a look that was part anger, part pain. Do you want to hear this or do you just want to make jokes? Oh, I definitely want to hear this. This is better than cable. She was quiet for a long moment and I could practically see her gathering courage to continue. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. The last night, we all went to this beachside restaurant. The other girls were tired and went back to their rooms early, but Victor and I ended up staying at the bar. We were talking about Clara, about how worried we both were, and somehow we just kept drinking. Those tropical drinks don't taste like they have any alcohol in them, but they do. What a shocking revelation. I know you're angry, she said. But please don't make this harder than it already is. Harder for who? For you. Because from where I'm sitting, you made your choices. Nobody forced you to keep drinking with another woman's husband. You're right, she said. And she sounded so defeated that I almost felt sorry for her again. Almost. I made terrible choices. We both did. We talked about our marriages, about how different our lives were, about how sometimes we both felt like we were pretending to be people we weren't. What the hell is that supposed to mean? I don't know, she said, fresh tears streaming down her face. I was drunk and confused and feeling sorry for myself. He was talking about how hard it was being married to someone who lived in a completely different world than he grew up in. And I was complaining about how I sometimes felt like I was settling for a smaller life than I'd imagined. That one hit like a physical blow. Settling. You felt like you were settling by being married to me. I didn't mean it like that, she said quickly. I was drunk and stupid and saying things I didn't really mean. But in that moment, sitting there with someone who understood what it was like to feel out of place in your own life, it felt like what? Like I wasn't alone. We sat there in silence for a moment and I could hear the clock on the wall ticking away the seconds of my old life. The life where I thought my wife loved me and we were building something together. So you felt understood and decided to celebrate by having sex with him. It wasn't planned, she said desperately. We walked back to the resort together and when we got to my room, we were still talking and he came in for just a minute and then you accidentally tripped and fell on his dick. God, you're being awful. I'm being awful. I'm not the one who cheated on my spouse while on vacation. I know what I did was wrong, she said, her voice breaking. I know I hurt you, and I know I betrayed Clara, and I know I ruined everything, but it really was just one night. One terrible, stupid night that I regret more than anything I've ever done in my life. One night that resulted in a pregnancy. Yes. One night that you didn't think to mention for an entire month. I didn't know I was pregnant until last. Lost and broke. And when you found out why she trailed, you thought you'd just never tell me and raise the kid as mine. I don't know what I thought, she admitted. I was terrified and ashamed and I didn't know how to tell you. I kept hoping maybe the test was wrong or maybe what? Maybe you could just pretend it never happened. Maybe you could forgive me, she whispered. And there it was. The question that had been hanging in the air since she dropped this bomb on me. Could I forgive her? Could we somehow work through this and come out the other side still married, still together, still pretending to be happy? Looking at her sitting there destroyed by guilt and fear and the weight of what she'd done, I wanted to say yes. Part of me wanted to be the bigger person, the understanding husband who could overcome anything for love. Part of me wanted to take her in my arms and tell her we'd figure it out together. But a bigger part of me, the part that had been planning our future and saving for our kids and believing in our promises to each other, was already dead. She'd killed it on a beach in paradise with a man who could give her everything I couldn't. I don't know, I said finally. I honestly don't know if I can forgive this. And in that moment, looking at her face crumpled with the realization that she might have lost me forever, I knew that our marriage was over. Maybe not officially, not yet, but in every way that mattered. She'd chosen him over me, even if it was just for one night. And now we all had to live with the consequences. I didn't sleep that night. Not a single goddamn minute. I lay there in what used to be our bed, staring at the ceiling while Marissa tossed and turned beside me, probably having nightmares about her perfect little world crashing down around her ears. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them together. My wife and Victor drunk on expensive booze and the thrill of betraying the people who trusted them most. The worst part, I kept trying to convince myself that maybe I could get past this. Maybe we could go to counseling, work through our issues, and somehow rebuild what she destroyed. People survived infidelity all the time, right? There were entire industries built around helping couples recover from affairs. Maybe I could be one of those noble, forgiving husbands who rose above his pain for the sake of love. But every time I started down that path, I hit the same wall, the baby. Because this wasn't just about a one-night stand or a moment of weakness. This was about raising another man's child, looking at that kid every day for the rest of my life, and being reminded of what my wife had done. This was about family photos where I'd know the truth that nobody else could see. About birthday parties and Christmas mornings and college graduations built on a foundation of lies. Around 5 o'clock in the morning, I gave up on sleep and went downstairs to make coffee. My hands were shaking as I measured out the grounds, and I kept replaying Marissa's confession in my head, like some kind of twisted highlight reel. The way she described feeling understood by Victor, like I was some kind of emotional who couldn't comprehend her complex inner life. The way she'd talked about settling for a smaller life, like our marriage was some consolation prize she'd accepted because she couldn't do better. That's when it hit me. The thing that had been nagging at me since yesterday. Clara didn't know. She was walking around, probably planning dinner parties and charity events, completely oblivious to the fact that her husband had knocked up her best friend during what was supposed to be an innocent girls' trip. She was living in the same fool's paradise I'd been living in a month ago, trusting people who didn't deserve it. I found myself reaching for my phone before I'd fully decided what I was going to do. Clara's number was in my contacts from some dinner party planning committee Marissa had roped me into helping with last year. We'd exchanged maybe a dozen text messages total, mostly about logistics and timing, but I had her number. Did she deserve to know? Hell yes, she did. Did I have the right to tell her? That was a murkier question. But as I sat there in my kitchen at 5:30 in the morning, watching the sun come up on the worst day of my life, I decided that moral ambiguity was a luxury I couldn't afford. Someone needed to tell Clara the truth, and it sure as hell wasn't going to be Marissa, who seemed more concerned about preserving her friendships than taking responsibility for what she'd done. I waited until 8 o'clock, figuring that was a reasonable time to call someone with devastating news because apparently I still had some sense of social etiquette even in the middle of my personal apocalypse. Hello. Clara's voice was bright and cheerful. Probably because she thought she was getting a friendly morning call from her best friend's husband. Maybe she thought I was calling to thank her for the amazing trip she'd given Marissa or to chat about some upcoming social event. Hi, Clara. It's me, Marissa's husband, I said, realizing I sounded like I was introducing myself to someone I'd never met, which was basically accurate since all our previous interactions had been surface-level pleasantries at parties where we were both just playing our assigned roles as supportive spouses. Oh, hi. She sounded genuinely pleased to hear from me. How are you? How's Marissa? I've been meaning to call her, but things have been so crazy since I got back from Boston. My mother's doing much better, thank goodness. But the whole experience was just exhausting. And there it was. The perfect opening to destroy her day, her marriage, and probably her entire worldview. Actually, that's kind of why I'm calling, I said, trying to figure out how to ease into this conversation. How do you tell someone their husband cheated on them? Was there a protocol for this kind of thing? Is everything okay? Her voice had changed, picking up on the tension in mine. You sound serious, Clara. I need to tell you something, and it's going to be really hard to hear, but I think you deserve to know. There was a pause, and I could practically hear her brain switching gears, preparing for bad news. What is it? It's about the trip. About what happened after you had to leave? Another pause, longer this time. What about it? I took a deep breath and jumped off the cliff. Marissa is pregnant and the baby, it's not mine. The silence that followed was so complete, I thought the call might have dropped. I could hear her breathing quick and shallow, like she was hyperventilating. I'm sorry, what did you just say? Her voice was barely above a whisper. The baby is Victor's, I said, because apparently once you start dropping truth bombs, you might as well make sure they hit their target. They slept together while you were in Boston dealing with your mother's emergency. That's not possible, she said. But her voice was shaking now. Victor was just helping out. He was being supportive. He would never. Clara, I'm not making this up. Marissa told me everything yesterday. They got drunk on the last night and one thing led to another. I heard her make a sound that was somewhere between a gasp and a sob. Are you absolutely sure? Are you sure she's not mistaken or confused? Or she's sure, I said. And so am I. The sound that came through the phone next was unlike anything I'd ever heard. A wail of pure anguish that made my chest tighten with sympathy even in the middle of my own pain. This was a woman's world collapsing in real time. And I was the one holding the demolition charges. Oh God, she whispered. Oh God, oh God, oh God, Clara, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry to have to tell you this, but I thought you deserved to know. How long have you known? She asked, and her voice was getting stronger now, harder. I could hear the anger starting to build underneath the shock. Since yesterday, Marissa just told me and she was never going to tell me, was she? She was just going to let me go on being friends with her, hosting dinner parties for her, treating her like family while she was carrying my husband's baby. I don't know what she was planning, I said. Though, honestly, I had a pretty good idea. Marissa had probably been hoping she could somehow make this whole situation disappear. Maybe pass the baby off as mine and go on living her double life. Where is she now? Clara asked. Upstairs. Still sleeping, I think. And where's Victor? I have no idea. Probably at your house, getting ready for work like nothing happened. I heard something crash in the background, followed by Clara shouting Victor's name in a voice that could have shattered glass. Then the line went dead. I sat there staring at my phone, knowing I'd just set off a chain reaction that was going to destroy at least 2 marriages and probably ruin several friendships. But for the first time since Marissa had dropped her bomb on me yesterday, I felt something that might have been satisfaction because Clara deserved to know the truth just like I had. And Victor deserved to face the consequences of what he'd done, just like Marissa was about to. Within 10 minutes, my phone started buzzing with text messages. First from a number I didn't recognize, probably Victor trying to do damage control. Then from Marissa's phone upstairs, which meant Clara had already called her and probably said some things that weren't going to help anyone's day get better. I deleted Victor's messages without reading them and ignored Marissa's frantic texting. Whatever they wanted to say, whatever explanations or justifications or desperate pleas for forgiveness they had prepared, I wasn't interested. I'd done what needed to be done. And now everyone involved could deal with the fallout. Because here's the thing about secrets. They're like cancer. They might stay hidden for a while, growing quietly in the dark, but eventually they always come to light. And when they do, they destroy everything they touch. I'd just chosen to be the surgeon instead of waiting for the disease to kill us all slowly. The sound of Marissa's feet hitting the floor upstairs told me my peaceful morning was about to end. In a few minutes, she'd come downstairs and demand to know why I'd betrayed her by telling Clara the truth. She'd probably cry and scream and accuse me of being vindictive and cruel. And you know what? She'd be right. I was being vindictive and cruel. But after what she'd done to me, to us, to the future we'd planned together, I figured I'd earn the right to a little vindictiveness. Sometimes the truth is the cruelest weapon of all, and sometimes that's exactly what people deserve. The sound of Marissa's feet pounding down the stairs was like a countdown to an explosion. I could tell from the rhythm, quick, panicked, desperate, that she'd gotten Clara's call and was about to unleash hell in our kitchen. I took another sip of my coffee and braced myself for what was coming. Because after yesterday's confession and this morning's phone call, I was pretty sure we were about to have the kind of fight that ended marriages. She appeared in the doorway like some kind of avenging angel, except instead of bringing divine justice, she was bringing accusation and fury. Her hair was a mess. She was still wearing the oversized t-shirt she'd slept in, and her face was flushed with the kind of anger that made people do stupid things like throw dishes or key cars. "What did you do?" she demanded, and her voice was pitched so high it probably disturbed dogs in neighboring counties. I looked up from my coffee with what I hoped was an expression of complete innocence. "Good morning to you," 2, sweetheart. Sleep well. Don't you dare, she said, pointing at me like I was a misbehaving dog. Don't you dare act like you don't know what I'm talking about. Clara just called me absolutely hysterical, saying you told her about. She trailed off, probably realizing that saying about my affair out loud made it sound even worse than it already was. About your pregnancy, I suggested helpfully about the fact that you're carrying her husband's baby. About the little detail you conveniently forgot to mention to your best friend while you were crying on my shoulder about how guilty you felt. Her mouth opened and closed a few times like she was a fish trying to breathe air. For a moment, she just stood there in our kitchen doorway, frozen in this expression of complete disbelief. It was like her brain couldn't process the fact that I'd actually done what any rational person would do in this situation, told the truth to someone who deserved to hear it. How could you do that? She finally managed to say, and her voice was barely above a whisper. How could you call her and destroy her life like that? I almost laughed. Actually, I did laugh. A short bitter sound that probably wasn't helping the situation but felt really good in the moment. I destroyed her life. That's rich, Marissa. Really rich. Because last time I checked, I wasn't the one who had an affair with her husband. That's not the point, she said. And now she was getting that shrill quality in her voice that meant she was working herself up to a full-scale meltdown. You had no right to tell her. That wasn't your secret to share. You're absolutely right, I said, standing up and setting my coffee mug down with deliberate care. It was your secret to share, your responsibility to tell your best friend that you'd been screwing her husband behind her back. But since you seemed perfectly content to let her go on living in ignorance while you figured out how to spin this whole situation to your advantage, I figured someone needed to step up and do the right thing. The right thing. She was full-on shrieking now, her face turning red with indignation. The right thing would have been letting me handle this my own way, in my own time. Your own way, I repeated. You mean the way where Clara never finds out and you somehow convince me to raise Victor's kid as my own while you all continue playing happy families at dinner parties and charity events? I never said that. You didn't have to say it. It was written all over your face every time I asked what your plan was. You were hoping this would all just magically work itself out, weren't you? Maybe you thought I'd be so grateful to finally be a dad that I wouldn't care whose DNA the kid actually had. She was crying now. Ugly sobs that shook her whole body. But I felt absolutely no sympathy for her. Zero. Because this was exactly the kind of crocodile tears routine she'd been pulling for the past month, acting like she was the victim in this situation instead of the person who'd caused it. You don't understand, she said between sobs. Clara and I have been friends since college. She's like a sister to me. This is going to destroy our friendship. Good, I said, and I meant it. Your friendship should be destroyed. You want to know why? Because friends don't sleep with each other's husbands. Friends don't keep life-altering secrets from each other. And friends definitely don't throw each other under the bus when the truth finally comes out. I wasn't throwing anyone under the bus. No. Then what were you doing? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you were perfectly happy to let Clara go on trusting her husband and believing in her marriage while you sat on the biggest bombshell in the history of your friendship. My phone buzzed with another text message, probably from Victor trying to explain himself or apologize or whatever it is that cheating husbands do when their worlds collapse. I ignored it just like I'd been ignoring all his calls and messages since Clara had undoubtedly confronted him about an hour ago. He's been trying to call you, Marissa said, noticing my phone. Victor, Clara threw him out. He's been calling and texting, begging you to talk to him. And why exactly would I want to talk to the man who knocked up my wife? Because he's sorry. Because this whole thing was a mistake that got out of hand. Because he never meant for any of this to happen. I stared at her for a long moment, genuinely amazed by her capacity for self-delusion. Do you hear yourself right now? You're actually defending him. You're standing in our kitchen, pregnant with another man's baby, and you're asking me to feel sorry for him because his wife kicked him out. I'm not defending him. I'm just saying that this situation is complicated. And calling Clara without talking to me first was what was honest, was fair, was exactly what any decent human being would do in this situation. She wiped her nose with the back of her hand, and for a moment, she looked like a little kid who'd been caught doing something she knew was wrong. It was cruel, she said finally. Cruel? I let the word hang in the air between us for a moment. You want to know what cruel is, Marissa? Cruel is your husband finding out he's going to be a father and being happy about it for exactly 3 seconds before you tell him the baby isn't his. Cruel is lying to your best friend's face for a month while you figure out how to manage the fallout from your affair. Cruel is asking the man whose life you just destroyed to keep your secrets and protect your reputation. I never asked you to do any of that. You didn't have to ask. You just assumed I would because that's what good little husbands do, right? They clean up their wives' messes and pretend everything is fine for the sake of appearances. The kitchen fell silent except for the sound of her crying and the distant hum of traffic outside. We stood there staring at each other across the space that used to be our shared life. And I could see the exact moment when she realized that this wasn't something we were going to work through. This wasn't a bump in the road or a rough patch or any of the other euphemisms people used when they didn't want to admit their marriage was over. "So, what happens now?" she asked. And her voice was small and defeated. Now you get to live with the consequences of your choices. Now Clara gets to decide whether she wants to try to rebuild her marriage or start over. Now Victor gets to explain to his friends and family why his wife kicked him out. And now I get to figure out what the hell I'm supposed to do with the rest of my life. "And us," she whispered. I looked at her standing there in our kitchen. This woman I'd loved and trusted and planned to grow old with, and felt absolutely nothing. No love, no anger, no sadness, just a kind of empty acceptance that this part of my life was over. "There is no us," I said. "There hasn't been an us since you decided Victor was more interesting than your husband." She started crying harder, but I was already walking toward the door. I had somewhere I needed to be, something I needed to do. And staying here listening to her try to justify the unjustifiable wasn't going to help either of us. "Where are you going?" she called after me. "To work," I said without turning around. Some of us still have responsibilities to people who actually trust us. I grabbed my keys and walked out, leaving her standing in our kitchen with her tears and her regrets and her complete inability to understand that some things once broken can't be fixed. The truth was out now, for better or worse, and everyone involved was going to have to figure out how to live with it. The next few weeks were like living in some twisted version of Groundhog Day. Except instead of Bill Murray trying to win over Andy McDowell, I had my cheating wife trying to convince me that our marriage was worth saving. Every morning I'd wake up hoping that maybe, just maybe, she'd come to her senses and realize that what she'd done was unforgivable. Instead, I got a daily dose of tears, apologies, and increasingly desperate attempts to rewrite history. It started the very next morning after our kitchen showed out. I came downstairs to find her sitting at the dining table with what looked like a carefully prepared speech written on a legal pad. Because apparently when your marriage is falling apart, who should forgive you for carrying another man's baby? "I've been thinking all night," she said, looking up at me with eyes that were still red and puffy from crying. "About us, about our future, about how we can move past this." "Move past this," I repeated, pouring myself coffee and trying to pretend this was a normal Tuesday morning conversation. "You mean move past the part where you cheated on me, or move past the part where you're pregnant with someone else's kid? Because those seem like pretty big obstacles to just skip over." "I know what I did was wrong," she said, reading from her notes like she was giving a presentation to the board of directors. "I know I hurt you and betrayed your trust, but people make mistakes and marriages survive infidelity all the time. We can get through this if we both want to." I sat down across from her, genuinely curious about what kind of mental gymnastics she performed to reach this conclusion. "Okay, I'll bite. How exactly do you see this working? You give birth to Victor's baby, we pretend it's mine, and we all live happily ever after. The baby doesn't have to change anything," she said. And I swear she actually believed what she was saying. Plenty of couples raise children that aren't biologically related to both parents, step families, adoption, sperm donors. It happens all the time. Those are completely different situations and you know it. Those are planned arrangements between consenting adults, not the result of your wife getting knocked up by her best friend's husband during a girls' trip. She flinched but pressed on. "The point is, biology doesn't make someone a father. Love does. Commitment does. You could be this baby's dad in every way that matters." I stared at her across the table, amazed by her ability to make the most selfish request in the world sound like some kind of noble sacrifice on my part. "And what about Victor? Does he just disappear from the picture? Does he sign away his parental rights and pretend his kid doesn't exist?" "We haven't worked out all the details yet," she said, which was apparently code for, "I'm making this up as I go along and hoping you're desperate enough to buy it." Who's we? Are you and Victor having planning sessions about how to manage your love child?" "No," she said quickly. "I haven't talked to him since it happened. Clara made it very clear that any contact between us would result in legal action." That was interesting. I'd wondered how the other half of this disaster was handling their own marital implosion. Apparently, Clara wasn't messing around when it came to consequences. "So, let me get this straight," I said, "you want me to forgive you for cheating? Agree to raise another man's child as my own and do all of this without any input from the actual biological father who's currently persona non grata in his own marriage? Does that about sum up your master plan?" "I want us to try," she said, and her voice was getting that pleading quality that meant she was about to start crying again. I want us to go to counseling and work through this and come out stronger on the other side. Stronger, I laughed and it came out sounding harsh and bitter. Marissa, you didn't just cheat on me. You didn't just have a meaningless one-night stand that we could potentially work through with enough therapy and time. You created a permanent reminder of your betrayal. Every time I look at that kid, I'm going to remember what you did. Every birthday party, every Christmas morning, every school play, I'm going to be thinking about how you chose someone else over me. She was crying now. Ugly sobs that shook her whole body. But it was just one night, one stupid, drunken mistake that I regret more than anything I've ever done in my life. A mistake that's going to last for 18 years. A mistake that's going to grow up and call me daddy while looking exactly like the man who destroyed our marriage. You don't know what the baby will look like, she said weakly. Come on, Marissa. Victor's got those dark eyes and that Mediterranean complexion. If this kid comes out looking anything like him, everyone's going to know the truth anyway. Did you really think you could pass off a little Victor clone as mine? She didn't answer, which was answer enough. She'd been hoping for a miracle, some genetic lottery that would let her pretend this whole situation never happened. Over the next few days, the begging intensified. She started leaving little notes around the house, in my briefcase, taped to the bathroom mirror, stuck to the steering wheel of my car. They all said variations of the same thing. I'm sorry. Please forgive me. We can work through this. I love you. It was like being haunted by the ghost of our marriage, except the ghost was very much alive and making my morning coffee routine really annoying. She tried the romantic approach, cooking elaborate dinners that she barely touched while staring at me across the table with hopeful eyes. She tried the practical approach, making lists of all the reasons why staying together made financial sense. She even tried the guilt approach, suggesting that divorcing her while she was pregnant made me the bad guy in this situation. Everyone's going to think you abandoned me in my time of need, she said one evening while I was trying to watch the news in peace. Let them think whatever they want, I said without looking away from the TV. Anyone who knows the truth will understand why I left. But what about people who don't know? What about your coworkers, your family, or friends? They're going to think you're a monster for leaving your pregnant wife. Are you seriously trying to guilt me into staying married to you because you're worried about what people will think? I'm trying to point out that divorce isn't going to solve anything. You're still going to have to deal with the gossip and the judgment and the awkwardness. At least if we stay together, we can control the narrative. Control the narrative. Like our marriage was some kind of PR campaign that needed better messaging. Like the problem wasn't what she'd done, but how other people perceived what she'd done. You know what I said, finally looking at her? You're right. People are going to talk. They're going to speculate and gossip and probably come up with theories that are even worse than the truth. But you know what they're not going to do? They're not going to have to wake up every morning next to someone who betrayed them. They're not going to have to pretend to love a child that represents the worst moment of their marriage. They're not going to have to spend the rest of their lives wondering when it might happen again. It won't happen again, she said desperately. I swear to you, nothing like this will ever happen again. You're right, I said, standing up and heading for the stairs because I'm not going to give you the chance. I'd already started looking at apartments online, checking my finances, and mentally preparing for the conversation with a divorce lawyer. I just hadn't told her yet because some small part of me was curious to see how far she'd go to try to save something that was already dead. The answer apparently was pretty far because the next morning I found her in the kitchen with pregnancy brochures spread across the table talking about how we could take parenting classes together and pick out nursery furniture and plan for our future as a family. Our future as if we had one. As if I was going to spend the next 18 years pretending to be grateful for the opportunity to raise her lover's child. That's when I knew it was time to put us both out of our misery and end this charade once and for all. There's something weirdly liberating about making a decision that you know is going to hurt like hell, but also set you free. It's like finally deciding to get a root canal. You know it's going to suck, but at least the constant pain will stop. That's exactly how I felt the morning I decided to pull the trigger on divorce papers instead of listening to another one of Marissa's speeches about second chances and the healing power of love. I'd spent the weekend apartment hunting, which was about as depressing as it sounds. Turns out that when you're a middle-aged insurance adjuster looking for a place to live after your wife destroys your marriage, your options are pretty limited. I could afford either a decent apartment in a sketchy neighborhood or a crappy apartment in a decent neighborhood, but not both. I went with decent neighborhood and crappy apartment because at my age, I figured I needed all the safety I could get. The place I settled on was a one-bedroom unit in a complex that looked like it had been built during the Carter administration and hadn't been updated since. The carpet was beige, the appliances were harvest gold, and the bathroom had the kind of shower that made you feel like you were being misted rather than actually cleaned. But it was mine, or would be mine once I signed the lease and figured out how to tell my wife that I was leaving. Monday morning, I called in sick to work, which wasn't technically a lie because the thought of going to the office and pretending everything was normal made me physically nauseous. Instead, I drove to the law office of Mitchell and Associates, which specialized in divorce cases and had decent reviews on Google, because apparently that's how people choose lawyers these days, the same way they pick restaurants and plumbers. Robert Mitchell turned out to be exactly what you'd expect from a divorce attorney. Sharp suit, sharper attitude, and the kind of handshake that let you know he'd seen every variation of marital disaster imaginable. He listened to my story without judgment, took notes on a legal pad that probably cost more than my monthly car payment, and gave me the kind of straightforward advice that I'd been hoping for. "This is pretty cut and dried," he said, leaning back in his leather chair. "Adultery is still grounds for divorce in this state, and pregnancy by another man certainly qualifies as irreconcilable differences. The question is, what do you want to walk away with?" "My dignity," I said, "and as little drama as possible." He smiled, and it wasn't a particularly warm expression. In my experience, men who say they want as little drama as possible usually end up getting screwed in the settlement. "Are you sure you don't want to fight for half the house, alimony, pain, and suffering?" "I just want out," I told him. "She can have the house, the furniture, the wedding china. We never use all of it. I don't want anything that reminds me of this marriage." "What about the pregnancy? Do you want to establish paternity? Make sure you're not on the hook for child support." That was a conversation I'd been dreading, but it had to happen. "The baby isn't mine. I want that clearly established in the divorce decree, so there's no confusion later." He made more notes, probably calculating his fee based on how complicated this was going to get. "We'll need DNA testing once the child is born, assuming the biological father is willing to cooperate. If not, we can compel testing through the courts." "He'll cooperate," I said. "His wife already kicked him out. I don't think he's in a position to make demands." After 2 hours of paperwork and legal strategy, I walked out of that office feeling like I just bought my freedom for the cost of a small car. It was expensive, but some things are worth paying for, and peace of mind was definitely one of them. That evening, I sat Marissa down for what I knew would be our last real conversation as husband and wife. She must have sensed something was different because she'd spent the day cleaning the house and cooking my favorite dinner, like she was trying to remind me of all the domestic bliss I'd be giving up. "We need to talk," I said, and I saw her face immediately shift into panic mode. "If this is about the baby again, I already told you that we can work through this. There are support groups for couples dealing with infidelity, and I found this counselor who specializes in." "I want a divorce," I said, cutting her off before she could launch into another prepared speech about the healing power of professional therapy. The words hung in the air between us like a death sentence. She just stared at me for a long moment, her mouth slightly open like she couldn't quite process what I'd said. "You don't mean that," she said finally. "You're angry and you have every right to be, but divorce isn't the answer. We can fix this." "No, we can't," I said, and I was surprised by how calm my voice sounded. "Some things can't be fixed, Marissa. Some mistakes are too big to come back from." "But I love you," she said. And she started crying again. "I made a terrible mistake, but I love you. And that has to count for something." "It does count for something," I said. "It makes this harder than it needs to be. But love isn't enough to fix what you broke." She tried everything she could think of in the next hour. She cried. She bargained. She promised to do anything I wanted if I'd just give her another chance. She offered to cut off all contact with Clara and Victor. To move to another city, to go to church, to get individual therapy, couples therapy, family therapy. She painted pictures of the life we could have together, the family we could build, the happiness we could find if I'd just forgive her. But I'd already checked out emotionally. I sat there listening to her plead for our marriage while mentally calculating how many boxes I'd need to pack my stuff and wondering if the cable company would let me transfer service to my new apartment. "I've already filed the papers," I told her when she finally ran out of steam, "and I've put a deposit down on an apartment. I'm moving out this weekend." "This weekend?" She looked genuinely shocked, like she'd thought we'd spend months talking this to death before anything actually happened. "There's no point in dragging this out," I said. "We both know how this ends." She started crying harder, the kind of desperate sobs that made me feel like a monster for not comforting her. But I learned the hard way that comforting Marissa just encouraged her to think there was still hope. And false hope was crueler than honest rejection. "What about our friends?" she asked. "What about your family? What are we going to tell everyone?" "We're going to tell them the truth," I said. "You had an affair. You got pregnant. And our marriage couldn't survive it. Simple as that. People are going to judge me," she said. "They're going to think I'm a terrible person. Some probably will." I agreed. "But that's not my problem anymore. I spent the rest of the week packing my life into cardboard boxes, sorting through 8 years of marriage and deciding what was worth keeping and what belonged to a version of myself that no longer existed. It was surprisingly easy to walk away from most of it. The wedding photos, the anniversary gifts, the furniture we'd picked out together. It all felt like artifacts from someone else's life. Saturday morning, I loaded the last box into my car and stood in the driveway looking at the house where I'd thought I'd grow old with the woman I loved. It looked smaller somehow, less significant, like it was already becoming just another building instead of the center of my world. Marissa watched me from the kitchen window, and for a moment, I felt a flicker of the old sympathy. She looked lost and broken, like a little girl whose parents had just told her they were getting divorced. But then I remembered what she'd done, what she'd chosen, and the sympathy faded. She'd made her bed, literally and figuratively. Now she could lie in it. I got in my car and drove away without looking back. Because sometimes the only way to save yourself is to walk away from everything you thought you wanted and start over with nothing but your self-respect intact. 6 months. That's how long it's been since I packed my life into cardboard boxes and drove away from the house where I thought I'd spend the rest of my life. 6 months since I traded a king-sized bed for a lumpy futon, a 2-car garage for a parking spot that's approximately the size of a postage stamp, and a marriage for a studio apartment that smells faintly of the previous tenant's cooking experiments. And you know what? Best trade I ever made. Don't get me wrong, the first few weeks were rough. Really rough. There's something deeply humbling about being a grown man eating cereal for dinner 3 nights in a row because you never learned how to cook for one person. There's something even more humbling about calling your mother to ask how to separate whites from colors in the laundry because your wife always handled that stuff. And you'd apparently been sleepwalking through the domestic responsibilities of adult life. But slowly, gradually, I started to figure things out. I learned that grocery shopping for one person is actually kind of liberating. No more arguments about brand names or whether we really need the expensive organic vegetables. I discovered that having complete control over the TV remote is worth approximately 3 months of relationship counseling. And I found out that silence, real silence, is one of the most underrated luxuries in the world. No more walking on eggshells, waiting for the next emotional breakdown about how sorry she was. No more pretending that forgiveness was just around the corner if we could just find the right combination of therapy and time. No more looking at my wife and seeing a stranger who traded our future for one night with someone else's husband. The divorce was finalized last month, and it was about as anticlimactic as legal proceedings get. Marissa had given up fighting for reconciliation somewhere around month 3, probably right around the time she realized that begging someone to take you back only works if they still love you. By the end, we were both just ready to sign the papers and move on with our separate lives. She kept the house just like I'd wanted. I kept my dignity just like I'd planned. Fair trade in my opinion. I hear things through the grapevine sometimes. This city isn't big enough to completely avoid news about your ex-wife, especially when she's carrying what is apparently a very obvious not your baby. Clara and Victor's divorce was finalized about a month before ours. And from what I understand, it was significantly messier. Apparently, when you're splitting assets worth millions of dollars instead of fighting over who gets the good coffee maker, lawyers get a lot more creative with their billable hours. Clara reached out to me a few times in those first couple of months. We met for coffee twice. 2 broken people trying to make sense of how quickly our lives had imploded. She was angry in a way that I recognized. That cold, focused fury that comes when someone you trusted completely betrays you in the most personal way possible. We didn't talk much about specifics, mostly just sat there drinking overpriced lattes and marveling at how naive we'd been. I keep thinking about all the signs I missed, she told me during our second coffee meeting. All the times he was working late or taking business trips that seemed unnecessary or just being distant. I thought he was stressed about work. I had no idea he was planning to cheat on me with my best friend. To be fair, I said, I don't think it was planned. I think they're both just selfish people who made selfish choices when the opportunity presented itself. Does that make it better or worse? She asked. I honestly don't know, I told her. Some days I think it would be easier if it had been planned because then at least I could hate them both without reservation. The fact that it was supposedly spontaneous just makes them seem pathetic instead of evil. We stopped meeting after that, not because of any drama or falling out, but because we realized we were both just picking at wounds that needed to heal. She had her own rebuilding to do, and so did I. Staying connected to the wreckage of our old lives wasn't helping either of us move forward. I heard she moved to Seattle last month. Fresh start, new city, new life. Good for her. She deserved better than what she got from Victor, just like I deserved better than what I got from Marissa. The baby was born 3 weeks ago, a boy. Apparently, I know this because my mother, bless her heart, still talks to Marissa's mother, and the gossip network between them is more efficient than any intelligence agency. Dark hair, dark eyes, looks nothing like me, and everything like his actual father. No surprises there. Marissa tried to put my name on the birth certificate anyway, which resulted in a very expensive legal battle that ended exactly the way you'd expect, with DNA evidence proving what we all already knew. Victor is the father legally and biologically, which means he gets to pay child support while dealing with his own custody arrangements. Marissa gets to be a single mother with a baby that serves as a permanent reminder of the worst decision she ever made. And I get to wake up every morning in my crappy little apartment, make my coffee exactly the way I like it, and not have to pretend that any of this is my problem anymore. The funny thing is, people expected me to be bitter. Coworkers, friends, even my own family kept waiting for me to have some kind of breakdown or revenge fantasy. They wanted me to be angry, to plot elaborate schemes to make Marissa's life miserable, to spend my energy trying to get back at her for what she'd done. But here's the thing I learned during those 6 months of rebuilding my life from scratch. Revenge is exhausting. Staying angry takes work. Plotting and scheming and trying to hurt someone who already hurt you is just another way of letting them control your life. And I was done letting Marissa control anything about my existence. Instead, I focused on the one thing I could actually control, myself. I started going to the gym because apparently stress and rage are excellent motivators for getting in shape. I took a cooking class because eating cereal for dinner loses its charm after the first month. I even started dating again, though that's a whole other adventure that involves learning how to explain your divorce without sounding like a complete disaster. The truth is, I'm happier now than I was during those last few months of my marriage. I'm definitely happier than I would have been if I'd stayed and tried to make it work with a woman who'd proven she couldn't be trusted with the most basic requirements of marriage, like not sleeping with other people. I see Marissa sometimes around town. She looks tired, like single motherhood isn't the glorious adventure she might have imagined. She's gained weight, which isn't surprising considering she's dealing with a newborn and no support system. Most of her old friends have distanced themselves from the drama, and Clara's exile apparently extended to anyone who remained loyal to the woman who betrayed her. She doesn't look happy, but she doesn't look like my problem anymore either. Last week, she sent me a text message. Just 3 words. I miss you. I stared at that message for about 30 seconds, then deleted it without responding because there was nothing to say. Missing someone and regretting your choices aren't the same thing as deserving a second chance. And even if she truly regretted what she'd done, even if she'd learned from her mistakes and become a better person, it didn't change the fundamental truth of our situation. She'd shown me who she really was when the chips were down, and I'd chosen to believe her. Some bridges once burned can't be rebuilt. Some trust once broken can't be repaired. Some marriages once destroyed by betrayal and lies and babies that belong to other men can't be saved by good intentions and wishful thinking. But some things, like self-respect, like dignity, like the knowledge that you did the right thing even when it was hard, those things are worth more than any marriage built on a foundation of lies. I kept my self-respect. Everything else was just stuff.